Hello, Jake. How are you?
I am doing great. Little tired. We stayed up late last night to finish Only Murders in the Building season one. We're late to the party, but we got there.
We went to the farmer's market recently, and they didn't have the stuff we wanted. We usually get this salmon dip at this seafood stand. They didn't have it. We went to this next stand, and they had tons of dips. And I was like, well, I guess it's time to channel Martin Short and Only Murders in the Building. And we bought a bunch of dips, and one of them made my stomach hurt real bad yesterday.
It can be a meal, though.
At times, it certainly is. He's spot on. We don't get ours from our mortal enemies, though.
Right, that's true. Good point.
Like I mentioned, we're covering the year 2021. It is the second to most contemporary episode that we're going to do in the series. And the films are Flea, which Jake gave to me, which is a very unique movie. In Jake's Oscar world, well, also in everyone's Oscar world, but Jake loves Oscar world. And it qualified for a whole bunch of awards because it was an animated film, a documentary, and some of the third thing.
Also, international films from Denmark.
Now, I watched this. We're starting with Fleet, and then we'll get to what I tortured Jake with afterwards. I watched Flea 3 months ago. It was just taking us a long time to get to these episodes, but I watched it because it was on this list that Jay gave me, and I watched it with American dubbing, which I'm glad I did because it gave me Riz Ahmed in the main role. And Riz Ahmed is a terrific voice actor, a terrific actor in general. Sound of Metal is not on our list, but Sound of Metal is one of my favorite movies now, and Riz Ahmed also great in Nightcrawler, another one of my favorite movies. Dude just pops up in a lot of my favorite movies and contributes.
Two of my favorite movies too. Yeah, I love both of them.
He's terrific. And he's about to be as of the time that we're recording this, we're 6 days out from Nimona debuting on Netflix, and he's one of the lead voices in that as well. And watching the trailer, his voice was what got me excited to see it, which I'm sorry to my buddy Mike, who's probably listening to this, but Mike used to work at Blue Sky Studios. This movie started at Blue Sky, but it wasn't until I heard Riz Ahmed's voice in the trailer that I was like, oh, I really am going to watch this movie. So sorry, Mike. But anyway, we're talking about Flea. Will you tell me why you recommended Flea to me and what it's about?
Yes, definitely. Well, like you mentioned, in the Oscar world, it's a total unicorn. It did something that no other movie has ever done. Every year, the Academy will release what are called shortlists of films that qualify for specific awards. In this case, the Best Documentary Feature, Best International Feature Film, and Best Animated Feature Film. They each come out with their own short lists of films that get submitted and are meet the qualifications. And no movie has ever qualified for all three before, and Flea is the first one to do so, which I think makes it unique. So yeah, it's an animated documentary from Denmark. The plot follows a young man who escapes from Afghanistan, goes to Denmark. He's a refugee. He's also gay in a place of the world where that's not as acceptable than it is, here in the United States. And it's presented, also a documentary. So it's an animated documentary, and two versions of it. There's the version that's primarily Danish, and there's the English dub version, which I think animated movies, it's really fine if you watch an English dub version versus the original language version, because really in an animated film, either way the voices are dubbed. So I don't think that makes like a huge difference the same way it does in like the films that are not animated.
I totally agree. The only times we've had this conversation off podcast before, but the only times I disagree is, one, I think in computer animation, it's a little different. I was trying to watch a stop motion animated movie that was originally Czech. It was in English, and it was just wild how the mouth movements, because they're so much more articulated in computer animated and stop motion animated movies than they are in 2D animated movies. It was pretty distracting, but then I watched Akira a couple months ago, and the Japanese original version was the subtitles didn't seem quite right, so I just watched it dubbed. Honestly, the subtitles were probably more accurate, but either way, the voice actors for the dub version were really good. There are two situations where I want to watch it in the original language. One is if the mouths are very articulated, so in computer animation or stop motion animation, when that happens, or if the American actors are bad, which
can happen.
Yeah, it can, absolutely. But it doesn't happen as much now. Voice acting has come a long way, both because you have seasoned actors who do it. Now, some seasoned actors who do voice acting aren't great. Some of them are. And because you have people who all they do is voice acting, and they've gotten very, very good at it. There's so much animation now that it can be a lucrative thing. And like we said, Riz Ahmed is in the English voice cast. And then Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who is a Danish actor, voices the guy doing the interview. And he's great. I don't think you've watched Game of Thrones, but
I have not.
He's very, very good. So yeah, the English voice cast is great. I wonder, is Nikolai Coster-Waldau in the Danish version? Because that would be cool. He is not. Okay, so never mind.
Not only does the film doesn't just follow, we've got the main character, but it also follows the rest of his family, who they kind of get spread out into these very different parts of the world. There's parts of the film, where they're going different parts of the world as immigrants and refugees, and just how much we take for granted that, like, in other parts of the world, people are just getting ripped apart, from their families, and going, they don't know where they're going to go or how long they're going to be there or where they're going to be next, and it's terrifying, frankly. And the way this movie presents it, kind of a documentary style, is very matter of fact, but you're seeing it animated, which you don't normally see. There's just a lot of unique things going on in this movie.
I found a few things very interesting about this movie. You mentioned it's a documentary. The narrative conceit is that this man, Amin, is being interviewed about his life, and parts of the story he's telling to Jonas, the guy who's interviewing him, and the guy who I believe is the director he's the director of the documentary, Jonas Rasmussen. Just asking probing questions, but it seems like they've struck up a rapport. And it's interesting because at the beginning of the movie, Amin is sort of reserved, and he's telling the story of his childhood in Afghanistan and what it was like to grow up there and the troubles he faced there. And then later on, he starts talking about the multiple times his family tried to leave because of what happened to them. I believe his father was arrested, and then they have multiple attempts to escape. Some of them go well. None of them go well. Some of them go through.
Better than others, yeah.
Right. His sisters get away, but their experience was terrible. He and his mother get away, but their experience is terrible. They meet up with his brother at one point in Sweden. And it's interesting because, like I said, in the beginning, he's talking about this stuff in a sort of matter-of-fact way. We're seeing it animated, but it's still sort of told in a this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But later on, when you get into his relationship with his brother, who's much older than him, and he starts talking about more about how his gay identity informed his relationship with his brother, it wasn't until then that I started feeling really connected to him, which is wild because shortly before that, you see his immigration story, and it is harrowing. Recently in the news, not so recently by the time this comes out, but there was a ship out off the coast of Greece that sank with something like 500 to 700 migrants on it, most of whom died, the vast majority of whom died. And in this movie, you see a ship like this where they're all crammed like sardines into a boat. He survives, obviously, because he's telling the story. But I was watching the scene thinking, like, I'm so mad at Jake for giving me this movie. I feel so claustrophobic watching this. Mm-hmm. It's pretty wild. And then the other thing that I found interesting was that this is not, while this is the only triple threat foreign film, documentary, animated movie, there is a great animated documentary that I watched shortly before this called Tower, about shooting. I think it was one of the first mass shootings or maybe even the first mass shooting on a university campus in the United States, in Austin, Texas. And that's a crazy movie, too, that I also didn't feel super emotionally connected to until closer to the end. Yeah, these two movies have some things in common. Both great, both worth checking out.
Yeah, I agree. And then there's another movie while we're on the subject of these kind of genre combinations. I guess there was another animated international film that got some Oscar attention called Waltz with Bashir, another very good film.
Yeah, I loved Waltz with Bashir. Waltz with Bashir is a tough hang. It covers a very difficult part of Israeli and Lebanese history. Great movie. I liked Waltz with Bashir more than I liked Flea, and I liked Tower a little more than I liked Flea, but Flea is definitely worth checking out, and I'm glad you recommended it to me. Did Flea win the Oscar? Did it win any of those Oscars?
It did not win any of them. No, it actually, well, the best animated film lost to Encanto.
Still haven't seen that.
Oh, it's you'll like that one. The international film lost to Drive My Car from Japan.
Oh, what a great movie.
Yeah, I mean, I love Flea, but I mean, also, yeah, Drive My Car was wonderful, and yeah, hard to argue with that.
5-star picture.
Yeah, exactly. 5 stars. No question about that. And then best documentary feature that went to The Summer of Soul, the Questlove documentary, which also was terrific and a great documentary. So, I mean, I thought Flea was good enough to win any of those categories, but the movies that did win were also good enough to win those categories. So no major complaints there. I mean, it was tough competition that year.
Yeah, and the Oscars love celebrities in categories that are typically non-celebrity filled.
Well, Riz Ahmed won for his short film, The Long Goodbye, Bring It All Back to Riz.
Right, for sure. And then, of course, in the worst version of this, Kobe Bryant won for Love Basketball, which is just not anything.
Gross, yeah.
How much do you have to love basketball for that movie to be anything?
More than we do, yeah, because it didn't do anything for me.
Same. I remember I saw that. That's the only year that I've gone to the IFC theater to see all of the shorts screened. And when that one came out, I'm like, was that a commercial for another movie? Was it a trailer for something else? It was like,
Or was it like a Sprite commercial?
yeah, it was not compared. It was all the animated shorts, and it was nothing compared to the other four. And not all of them were amazing, but they were all substantive, and that wasn't. Speaking of things that aren't substantive, I assigned Jake the Snyder Cut, knowing how Jake feels both about the DC extended universe and Zack Snyder. So, for the three of you that don't know what this is, in 2017, a movie came out called The Justice League. And this was Warner Brothers and DC's answer to Disney and Marvel's Avengers franchise. Marvel had been building up to 2012's Avengers. Marvel had put out 5 movies: Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America: First Avenger. And then all of those characters teamed up in the Avengers, and it was crazy successful. And it was the first time that a big studio had done anything like this in theaters. It had been done to a much lesser extent on television, but and in comics it had been done over and over and over again. Crazy successful. So DC, wanting to get in on this, did a Man of Steel movie starring Superman. They did Batman versus Superman, which was not so well received. Man of Steel was met with mixed reviews. It was this is an okay Superman movie.
There's some people who really love it and really go to bat for it.
Sure, and why not? There's nothing. I mean, Superman kills a guy in it, and some people were upset by that. But grow up, you're an adult. And then Batman versus Superman comes out, where they introduce also a gritty Batman. Well, look, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies are pretty gritty, but Christian Bale isn't the most depressing person on the planet. Whereas Ben Affleck's Batman, which he does, I actually thought Ben Affleck was pretty good as Batman. And there are some merits to that movie. It's just really long. I'm talking about Batman versus Superman now. It's very long. There's a lot of really silly contrivances in it and some weird casting. Not Ben Affleck, though. He's
Affleck as Batman is the least of that movie's problems.
Yeah. And then they also released a Wonder Woman movie, which was really well received. I think a little overrated, but good as far as totally serviceable superhero movie. Okay. So then they were like, we don't have time to do the rest. So here's Justice League. And you have those 3 heroes, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, as well as Cyborg, The Flash, and Aquaman. In the middle of production, Zack Snyder's daughter very tragically committed suicide, and he left the production. And Joss Whedon, who directed The Avengers, came on and finished the movie. Now, there may have been other things going on. We know now that Warner Brothers was pivoting crazy back and forth in reaction to the many failures of this franchise. This movie comes out, Justice League, in 2017, and it's very bad. It's borderline incomprehensible and pleases almost no one. DC has some mega fans, and I guess they defended it, and they would have defended anything. But it was very bad. So the internet kicks in. They start calling it the Justice League because Joss Whedon directed it.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah. And they start this campaign called Restore the Snyderverse, or Release the Snyder Cut, on the assumption that there was this version of it that Zack Snyder had finished that they should have released as well. Now that's not real. There was no version of it. But lucky for these fans, the world ended. COVID-19 attacked the planet. Things weren't able to be in theaters, and HBO had just released HBO Max, their streaming service, and they really needed content, and they really needed people subscribing. So they announced 2 things. One, that all of their movies that were going to be in theaters would not be released in theaters and would just be released on HBO Max, which got a lot of people to subscribe to HBO Max and also ruined their relationship with Christopher Nolan and pissed off Denis Villeneuve. And the Christopher Nolan because he made Tenet with the studio, and Villeneuve because he had made Dune with the studio. Nolan no longer works with Warner's. Villeneuve still is because he's still making this Dune franchise. And the other thing that came out of it was they were like, all right, we're going to give Zack Snyder money to finish the Snyder Cut or do the Snyder Cut. And what that ended up being was a longer version of this movie because Justice League was surprisingly short. I think just under 2 hours.
You're right around there, I think, yeah.
And the Snyder Cut's at least a half hour longer.
A half hour of the Snyder Cut? It's 4 hours.
No, stop. That's what I put you through.
Are you kidding?
I can't remember. I watched it a long time ago.
No, it's 4 hours long.
Okay, so it's another 2 hours. Excuse me. Apologies to Jake.
Yeah, it's literally this. It's twice this long.
Okay. So the movie's twice as long. And what the movie does is and look, I actually think the Snyder Cut is kind of successful in that it does what more movies put out before Justice League would have done. It fleshes out some of the characters. Like Cyborg, you actually understand why he's in this movie. Not so much the Flash. The Flash is still not anything. So I'm also recording this after I've seen the Flash, which I don't think is as bad as many people think. Anyway, so yeah, he puts it out. It's beefed up. It's got a different villain. Well, it's got the same villain, but then his boss is also in it. It's got better effects. And the scenes just feel like a little bit more realized, which exposes two things. One, when movies have really bad production issues, maybe you should wait to put the movie out. And two, when you take your time or allow artists to take their time, even if they can't deliver a great movie, they can deliver a movie that's like clearly theirs. It really exposed that Justice League was rushed. The original, the Justice League was rushed, and that with more time, it could have just like looked good. And this is a lesson that studios did not learn, because movies look like crap now. I mean, Jake, we've had this conversation where you said you don't notice as much as I do when effects are bad. I can't not. It just, movies today look like goo to me. They look so undone, and they are. And we hear from artist after artist who work on these movies that they were not given the time to do it right. They were overworked. It's like too much work in a short period of time, whereas let these people work like humans work and create a good product. That's not happening. So that lesson also wasn't learned. Anyway, what's the story of the Justice League? An alien comes to Earth looking for some contraptions that will destroy Earth, and the Justice League have to stop them. Superman is dead because he died in Batman versus Superman. So what are the rest of the less powerful heroes to do? That's the plot. Jake, what'd you think?
It was an interesting exercise, and I want to say like I'm glad it exists because of these things. Like you said, it was a good example of like showing like okay, you gave Zack Snyder all this money and all this time, and he created a movie that is very Zack Snyder. However, I don't really love what Zack Snyder does generally. So Justice League, I can certainly respect like what he did, and that it was cool that he got to do his thing. Also, on the other hand, is it good that we just kind of caved to the internet on this one and like just gave a bunch of angry, yelling people what they wanted? I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, that exposes two different problems.
That's a whole different thing from the movie.
But also, it turns out that it was probably manipulated, and that most of the push behind that were bot farms, not genuine people, which doesn't really matter in the end, because that movie did drive subscriptions for HBO Max. So whatever. But yes, it does bring up this issue of also now with AI becoming so top of mind for everybody, how vulnerable to manipulation our theater is going to be. This actually came up again not long after this with the movie Morbius, which was a total bomb that Sony put out, another superhero movie.
Worse than any Justice League or DC, like any worse than Dawn of Justice, worse than Man of Steel. It's probably one of the worst movies I think I've ever seen.
So I've never seen it. I think it's the only major superhero movie to come out in the last few years I haven't seen. Can't imagine watching it, especially now that this Craven trailer came out and it looks really bad. And I think I might just quit on that whole thing. But the internet got It's Morbin Time, a hashtag called It's Morbin Time trending. And the studio misinterpreted this as, oh, there are people who actually still want to see this movie in theaters. We'll re-release it. And then no one showed up. Hopefully that now we have the inverse, and maybe the studios will learn that lesson. But studios don't learn lessons, so maybe
historically, that's not something they've done very well.
You were saying your other feelings on Zack Snyder and the Justice League.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are very few cases in the history of them where you really need to go 4 hours. I don't think Justice League is necessarily one of them, but also, I mean, if you're launching your streaming service, you want to have something special and unique on there. Like, yeah, I mean, I understand why this was it, and it's it's a neat idea, and so I mean, I'm kind of on one hand, glad it exists. I think it's a cool experiment sort of thing, but I didn't particularly care for it, and there was the characters were more fleshed out, especially Cyborg. I think that really helped that character, but I still didn't really care about any of them at all. And one thing I'd say the 4-hour cut didn't do was it didn't make Amy Adams any more necessary in the movie. And I have a hard time when you've got Amy Adams in a movie and you just don't use her to do anything.
I am trying to think, is Zack Snyder interested in female stardom? It's kind of a weird question, but I think about it. Okay, so I just watched Army of the Dead because I will watch anything that Dave Bautista is in. Okay, tangent. An article came out, or an interview with Kurt Angle, the professional wrestler, came out where he said he thinks Dave Bautista might be the best wrestling actor, which is so much hedging to say something that's so obvious. It's crazy. Dave Bautista is far and away the best wrestling actor. I guess John Cena is also good. And The Rock sometimes makes a lot of money. He then brought up that in Dave Bautista's wrestling career, the reason he improved so much, he debuted and was just awful as a wrestler. Couldn't talk, was too old, was injury prone, couldn't really move around. Got paired up with Triple H and Ric Flair, who are two just legends in wrestling, and apparently listened a lot and then became one of the biggest stars in wrestling. And honestly, at the height of his stardom was when Jake and I were becoming good friends, and we were obsessed with what was going on with him in wrestling, with good reason. It was very good. And Angle attributed that to Dave Bautista's ability to listen. And it's very clear that the same thing is happening in his acting career, because he's seeking out auteur directors to work with and clearly paying attention to them. And the way that I find it most clear, to bring this back to the actual conversation we're having, is so you see in Knives Out when he works with Rian Johnson, he does a great job. In Blade Runner and Dune, when he works with Denis Villeneuve, he does an amazing job. Even in like Stuber, where it's just a buddy comedy, he's doing a great job in that genre.
My Spy with the little girl.
Same thing. He's doing Arnold in those movies, and he's great at it, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Then I've been watching also some of his schlocky action movies, and in some of them, he looks like he's having a good time, and that probably means that the vibe on set is fun. And in some of them, he seems really bored or dour, and that, I don't know what that means for the vibe on set, but those directors are clearly just making those schlocky movies. He's the star of Army of the Dead, and he looks so bored the entire movie. And it makes the movie work. It's a bad movie. Honestly, it's borderline unwatchable. And his lack of flair in that movie makes it worse. Which is to say, I don't think Zack Snyder is bringing a lot of joy to the people's lives on set. I just watched Asteroid City, and it's so clear that and obviously we know people keep coming back to work with Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
Who's coming back that isn't contractually obliged to work with Zack Snyder? Like Ben Affleck bailed on this franchise.
Sure did.
He came back here and there, but he pretty much bailed. Like, those people are under contract, like the same way that Marvel actors do these like 5-picture deals with the studio. It doesn't seem like people are dying to work with Snyder. There are no Zack Snyder regulars in Army of the Dead. I don't think we'll see Dave Bautista in another Zack Snyder movie. I'd be surprised. It's actually interesting. Dave Bautista was supposed to play Peacemaker in Suicide Squad, and he turned it down because he really wanted to work with Zack Snyder, and he wanted to develop a relationship with Netflix. What a smart guy. But I wonder if he regrets it, because John Cena clearly had so much fun with that role. And you know what? In that regard, I think Cena probably did a better job than Batista would have.
Yeah, it seems more like a Cena thing. You know what's really cool about Batista too is that he doesn't have to be like the leading guy in any of his stuff. Like in some of his things, he's got these really small parts, but he nails it. Like the two Villeneuve movies, Dune and Blade Runner. They're not very big parts, but those were cool movies for him to be in, and like you said, a great director for him to work with. And this is just the Dave Bautista podcast at this point.
I'm fine with that. I would do a Dave Bautista podcast.
100%.
Yeah, and like as Drax, it's not a huge role, but he did a great job with it for 3, 4, 5 movies he was in as that character. So, and one bad Christmas special. And yeah, I would actually say I'm with you. I'm glad it exists, especially in the face of something like Batgirl not existing, where Warner made this movie and then for what seemed like tax reasons are never releasing it. I mean, it's probably not finished. Like I don't think that the post-production is done. But I heard Brendan Fraser on the Howard Stern show just being really sad that his performance in this movie is never going to be seen.
The movie, it worked on the movie and put a lot of hard work into it. And, I'm not super stoked about a Batgirl movie, and I haven't, really loved the DC extended universe as a rule. But just that it's not coming out, I think, is insane. When it would hurt the brand. Like, are you guys aware of your brand reputation at this point? I mean, you released Shazam 2. And that movie looks unfinished as hell.
Right, and the Flash actually, it's not done, and they can spin that however they want, but those effects are not done. I remember when, wow, look, we're getting this all out of our system because there really aren't a lot of superhero. I don't know if there's any other superhero movies in our list, so we're getting this all out of our system in this episode. I remember when X-Men Origins Wolverine came out in like 2008, 2009. it leaked online. An unfinished version of it leaked online, and that's the version I saw. And Flash doesn't look that much better than the unfinished version of X-Men Origins Wolverine. Now, the story is more interesting, and Ezra Miller, for all his terrible alleged faults, seems to be doing more with his role than anyone did in that schlock in 2009. But the effects look about the same. Anyway, it's absurd that Batgirl didn't come out. I'm sure it would not have been good, but it should exist.
One good thing about The Flash, I did see an interview with the director where allegedly he said something like, yeah, there is this 4-hour cut because it's not as good as the cut that was released. So I don't really want to release it. He goes, the cut that's released is the good one.
The problem with The Flash has nothing to do with its length. It feels like a movie, like a tight movie from beginning to end. I was never bored. It's not, I don't think that there's like scenes missing that need to be there. The problem is that the scenes that are there look bad. They just, the physical, what they put on screen looks unfinished.
He's already putting the kibosh on the idea that there will be a longer version later.
Good. I don't know that anyone's clamoring for it. That feels a little bit like he's reaching for like a I'm Zack Snyder, but don't worry, I'm not going to do Zack Snyder kind of thing. And speaking of Zack Snyder, going back to the movie we're actually talking about, I was enjoying it for the most part. As I was watching it, I would go on YouTube and look at what the original looked like. And I was like, wow, this is way better. A more fully realized movie. And then you got to the last 15 minutes where for some reason they do a dream, it's either a dream sequence or a flash forward. I don't know which, where Batman is with a ragtag group of people because Superman has turned evil and destroyed the world. And he's with his ragtag group, and he has to get the help of Jared Leto's Joker from Suicide Squad. And I watched this scene, and I was like, I cannot believe how much goodwill this movie lost with me at the very end. That never happens, except for Ford versus Ferrari. The very last shot of Ford versus Ferrari, I was just like, what? Okay, so spoiler for Ford versus Ferrari. 1, 2, 3. The Christian Bale's character dies at the end in a completely unnecessary scene that could have been a card that just said, so-and-so died in a crash. But we had to see it. Why? And we had to watch his son watch him die at the end of this like uplifting movie. It's so totally not part of that movie. I got so mad, and I really liked Ford versus Ferrari up to that point. These are the two movies. Now, Zack Snyder's Justice League is not as good as Ford versus Ferrari, but his ending did the same thing to me, where I was like, why is Jared Leto in this? Why are they doing this? This has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. And then what that scene did was got the internet all riled up saying, return to the Snyderverse or restore the Snyderverse, as if there would be more of these. And there never was, thankfully. And now the whole thing is being rebooted at the end of 2023. James Gunn taking over and starting with new actors in the roles. So at least we can finally stop watching these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the other things about watching these movies is that you just kind of got the sense that they just never had a good footing for what they were doing and where it was all leading. Like, even with some of the Marvel stuff, those, for instance, like superhero fatigue or whatever you want to call it, with like some of the lesser Marvel movies, they've at least had a plan and like there's a long range goals there. And then with this DC, that they've changed course so many times in such a short amount of time. It's like, why would you latch on to any of this? There's really not been any follow-up. But like there's no point. Just hasn't been a lot of point to any of these movies even existing.
I'll do you one better, or I'll back you up here. You say, what's the point to any movie? Okay, that's fine. Like, each individual movie should entertain on its own, but that's not what DC was doing. They were giving the impression that there was something going forward and then not delivering on, which is sort of my issue with, like, the Transformers movies. Mm-hmm. There are 7 of these things. They all essentially do the same thing. Why would you watch, like, if you find one that you like, a lot of people like the third one. I stopped after, we saw the second one together, I think.
Yeah, we did.
It's one of the worst movies of all time. So I didn't watch anymore, but apparently the third one is the best one. So let's say you like the third one. There's no need to watch any of the other ones. They're all the same.
Yeah.
The reason that you have something like that, where, okay, it's all the same, why keep watching? You could ask the same question of, like, why watch another Arnold Schwarzenegger action movie? Well, he's playing different characters in each one. Even if they're all hitting the same beats, you watch for him. But there's no humanity in the Transformers movies, and there's not really any humanity in these DC movies, and increasingly not really in these Marvel movies, which is becoming a bummer. As of we're recording this, the first episode of Secret Invasion is out, and I have no desire to turn that on. I'll probably wait till it's over and then watch all of it. Like I said, let's backtrack. Do you have any more you want to talk about Justice League?
Backtrack to Jared Leto, and can we just
yes.
Can we, as the society, maybe agree like we should just stop encouraging him to do all of the various things that he does and is not very good at any of them anymore? Like, it's hard to believe the man won an Oscar because I remember him being very good in like the Dallas Buyers Club and all that. But ever since then, it's just been just the sight of him is just like, ugh, I can't even stand looking at him.
I liked him in Blade Runner.
Oh yeah, good call. Sorry, he's good in that too.
But here, let's do this. When Army Hammer was a thing, I didn't get it. And I would put into the universe often, can we not with Armie Hammer? Let's just not. We don't have to do this, and we don't have to keep trying to make him happen. So we can start. I mean, I think the Jared Leto train is out of the station, and he's just, even though he's allegedly quite a bad person, don't think we can get that toothpaste back in the tube. Okay, so Flea, what did you give it?
Flea, I gave 5 stars. Time aside, it's in my ranks in my top movies of that year.
Wow. Okay. Like I said, I didn't really feel attached to it in the first half, and then much more so in the second. So I went 3.5 for Flea, and I believe I went 2.5 for Zack Snyder's Justice League.
I think that's what I did also. Yes, I did 2.5 as well.
Great. So that's it for 2021. We'll be back next week. So this was the second to most recent episode we're going to have done, and next week we are going to our second to oldest episode, when we do 1924, and also a little bit more Batman talk, oddly enough. If you want to know what is coming out next week, go to our Letterboxd profile. You can find me at Brad Garoon on Letterboxd. I think, Jake, you're Jake Ziegler on Letterboxd.
Yep, it's Jake_Ziegler.
And both of us have pinned to our profiles our Never Did It podcast list. You could also just search for the Never Did It podcast list. And the 2 movies that will be discussed on next week's episode are always at the top of that list. So check that out. And thank you for joining us for Never Did It.